ignorant hypothesizers with a very exciting event.
Is that how you're starting this?
Yeah, it's a riddle. What do you get?
Tell me, what do we get?
You get the Racing Line podcast, the Bathurst 12-hour preview. That's what you get. So, that being said,
That's so corny.
so stupid. With that being said, welcome to episode 64 of the Racing Line podcast, our third for the year, the second podcast in succession where we look at the upcoming Bathurst 12-hour. But this week is going to be a little bit of a deep dive into the entries and the entry list for the 12-hour, where Joe and I break down the different classes, or the different GT3 classes. And then we kind of give you our insights, our inputs, and maybe a few predictions as to who the favorites are for each class. And then we'll even give you a smoky for each class. And this is
smoky. What's a smoky? Like a dark horse?
Smoky's a dark horse, Joe. That's exactly what it is.
So that's why they're called smokies. Who ever called them a smoky in their life?
You just don't gamble enough, so you haven't heard the phrase.
Fair enough.
Is that the new Arsenal jersey you're wearing?
No.
Oh, okay.
Just
So that
wearing it
being
in,
said, now we have not done
celebration.
any, that's all right. We have not done any lists. We haven't created any lists for this podcast. It's completely off the cuff. So it should be a good one.
Do you want to explain why it's off the cuff?
No, we'll leave that because we might get Brad on the later.
Get that rectified.
There was a little bit of a we're supposed to have an interview for you, but there was a little bit of a loss or mix up in translation in relation to email. So hopefully we'll get that rectified. So with all of that being said, welcome. Thank you for listening to the podcast. And this is our preview of the Bathurst 12-hour. So Harry, cue the music. All right. So before we start talking really about any of the lineups, I think it's pretty important to state that this is a 12-hour race. So everything that we are going to be saying about, the teams and the drivers that are kind of looking strong has to come with the caveat that in a 12-hour race, anything can happen. If you asked, I think, Schnitzer Racing in 2018, if they thought they were going to be a favourite for the race, they would have said yes. And then Chaz put it in the wall off a restart. So anything can happen in a 12-hour race. So that's our little caveat. But let's start by looking at the pro entries for the 2023 Bathurst 12-hour. And we have a fair few of them. We've got 2, 4, 6. We've got 8 pro entries. We've got Kenny Habul's Sun Energy Mercedes. We've got the Super Cheap Auto 888. Super Cheap Auto 888 Mercedes with Shane Van Gisbergen and Brock Feeney. And not Mario Engel, Maxi Book. We've got the Grouper M Mercedes coming back. We've got Craft Bamboo returning to Bathurst with the hope of winning it this time. We've got a Melbourne-based Audi. We've got 2 WRT BMWs, the new BMW M4 GT3s. This is going to be their first GT World Challenge event ever with those new BMWs, and it's the first time that WRT have raced something other than a Audi in GT racing forever. And last but not least, we've got the Manthey Porsche making its return to Bathurst for the first time since 2017, I think it is. So straight off the cuff, Joe, tell me your 2 favourites or your 2 strongest teams coming into this event in the pro category.
I think for me, it's going to be the Manthey Porsche, and it's going to have to be, I would say, one of a Mercedes. I think the Mercedes and the Porsche both have a grip on the track. They've been here before. They've brought these variations of car before. And I think we've seen them both be very successful, and especially the Manthey Porsche has I think it has a lineup of like sort of young guns that is not that are not afraid to go fast for like the whole race. So they would be my gut instinct kind of bets. I would probably
We'll
lean
start by
towards
saying that
a triple eight car.
just for Aussie fans out there, the Manti Porsche, the Grello Manti Porsche has Australian Matt Gamble, who's done a few fastest laps around Bathurst in the GT3 series whenever he comes down. So he's racing. We've got Matthew Jaminet, who's the second entry for the car, and we've got Thomas Preining, who last year in DTM had 3 race wins, was by far the most dominant Porsche driver in the DTM last year. So it's quite a strong lineup. But if you're looking for an Australian connection, I think the Manti Porsche is a good place to start. It's also green and gold. So
and they're also teaming up with the Aussie team. They're teaming up with the EMA.
Yep,
So,
EMA Racing, who've made a few
we've seen-
appearances in European GT and also in the Nordschleife events, bringing their car back to Australia to race, obviously, the Australian 12-hour. So it's a bit of a collab between Manti and EMA, which is really cool to see. It's really good to see Australian. And I think one of the things we will have to talk about tonight, Joe, is the collaboration between a lot of our European well-known names, teams, etc. And rather than bringing their whole factory efforts down, collabing with some of our Australian teams, and then also seeing some of our Australian teams teaming up to have a more competitive advantage in this event. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. I think an interesting topic of conversation, and we did kind of pry it open a little bit last week with Marcel, is Team WRT bringing 2 brand new BMWs to the event. They've obviously brand new in the sense that they haven't raced at the 12-hour, but they did race last year in Europe and in America with quite a lot of success, it has to be said. They've been dominant pretty much since they came out of the box. And WRT is a new team with the BMW, except it's uber experienced. So what do you make of that? What do you make of Valentino Rossi coming down? Does that give any more spectacle to the event? And even though it's a new car coming to Bathurst for the first time, do you think they have a real shot at winning?
I think they've got a shot at winning. I think the lineups are pretty handy. I would say that the Valentino Rossi lineup is, I would say, weaker. I don't know how Rossi's going to go on a track like Bathurst. It's so different to anything else that he's driven. Having said that, he did really good at Spa last year, but this isn't Spa. So
he was quite good at Spa within the consistency stakes, but there was considerable difference in pace between himself and the pro drivers, and he's considered a pro, and yet.
So hiding him in a pro lineup, I think, is going to be an interesting proposition. But it's WRT, and I think realistically, what this is going to bring the event is going to be just massive numbers of eyeballs, probably for interest's sake, which is definitely understandable. But I'm interested to see. It's been a couple of years since we've seen a pro BMW lineup hit the mountain. So for me, I'm very excited to see that. I'm excited to see a team as experienced as WRT coming to the mountain with these new BMWs, because realistically, we don't know if they'll be here next year either with what they want to do. So they might be a one and done in these BMWs. So I'm happy to.
It's not BMW.
What was that? Sorry.
WRT.
I think the BMWs will be here. I just don't think. I don't know if WRT will be running them next year. So I'm happy to see what they can do
with the performance that they put in Dubai last week. So the first 24-hour race of the year, a lot of teams will go down to Dubai to kind of just get their processes in place. Obviously, it's a great race, but it's a little bit of a shakedown weekend for a lot of teams, and obviously WRT used it in that regard as well. 24-hour race. Both teams were pretty much incident-free, hiccup-free for the majority, if not the whole of the race. So they're very limited track time with the BMWs does look uber impressive. So they have to be, in my opinion, definitely one of the teams to view. And yeah, maybe not so much the Rossi team, but definitely the the Ventthor, Charles Viet's team, the Skechers BMW. I think is going to be one of the big players in the event, which is awesome. It's awesome to have as many manufacturers as possible, competing. We've got the
What
Porsche, so we've got Audi with only one pro lineup this year that's coming out of the Melbourne Performance Centre, which is a little bit different considering how many Audi lineups we've had, or how many Audi cars we've had at Bathurst, throughout really the history of the event. It's normally one of the most strongly presented teams in relation to the pro lineups, but this year is the first time that they aren't going to be involved in the Intercontinental GT Championship, and we've
they're
seen.
not sure if they are.
Okay.
So because they're not sure, they're sort of running a skeleton team at the moment. So if, as you can see, they have got the one car in pro, so they will score points to that goal if they do choose to do it, but they're still shuffling around their team. See, Audi is a very interesting proposition because they seem to be in a bit of a transitional period at the moment. I think they're toning back a bit on, I don't know, like if they're they're definitely toning back on their motorsport footprint in the same time that they're ramping up for Formula One.
Has to be yeah. Well, if you look at the pro lineup anyway, they've got Mattia Drudi, they've got Christopher Haase, they've got Patrick Niederhauser, who are all extremely fast pedalers. I mean, Christopher Haase has been an ever-present in the factory Porsche lineup for the longest time. Patrick Niederhauser, maybe not so well known internationally, but in relation to GT World Challenge Europe, but more exclusively in the GT Masters, the German GT3 Championships, won the championship twice. So he's definitely no slouch behind the wheel as well. But yeah, it's very interesting that there's only one pro lineup, considering how many Audis are run in Australia.
Another thing that is interesting this year is that they don't have Valvoline backing, so that's something that has to be remembered as well. So I don't know if that is something to do with it.
Yeah,
but it's an interesting consideration to remember.
Not as many bullets in the chamber for that manufacturer. We've got a plethora of Mercedes. So Mercedes are making up half of the pro grid. We've got the Craft Bamboo team, who are returning to Australia for the second time. We've got Group M, who are running. Are they running in their own capacity this year, Group M, or are they still running under the 888 banner?
No, they're not. I think they're running in their own capacity.
Okay.
Because 888's running their own two cars.
We've got this super cheap auto racing car. This is going to be very interesting because they've got Shane van Gisbergen, who's probably undebatably the fastest driver in Australia. They've got Brock Feeney, who in the two events that he raced the 888 Mercedes last year showed that he was by no means a slouch behind the wheel of that new car as well. And they've got Maxi Book. So I think this has to be one of the strongest lineups really on the grid, has to be said. And also we know the expertise and the quality of the 888 team as well in relation to pit stops and all that kind of stuff. So Mercedes have quite a lot of firepower for the pro lineup. And I think, any four of those cars, particularly the 888 car, it'd be interesting to see who's running in the Sun Energy car, the car that won the event last year. It's been classified as a pro this year, which would suggest that Kenny Habul isn't racing at the Bathurst 12 hour. So it'll be interesting.
Or he's been ranked as a pro. I don't think that would happen though.
That's quite interesting proposition. I doubt it would happen, but you would assume that there would be a similar lineup to last year, which would be Martin Conrad, Philip Ellis. But it'll be interesting to see when that lineup is released, who's racing that car. And Kenny Habul's only here in a professional capacity, not as a racer.
I can't see him coming and doing it in a professional capacity without being a racer. That's the thing.
The only thing it could be is that because he's raced the Daytona the week before. I don't know if he feels like he's still got it.
Or is it because maybe he'll have a 4-car lineup and 3 of the drivers are pros?
If that's the case, it's still an M. If there's 3 pros and 1 M.
It's interesting. I'm not sure, but we haven't seen a lineup for that car yet.
Mm.
But being the reigning champion at the moment, it's good that it is returning.
Yeah.
But yeah, off the rip, I wouldn't. We don't even know the lineup, but if Habul's in the car, I don't think it will be an outright favorite for that reason.
Yep, 100%. So let's move into the Pro AM ranks now.
I would like to start this part off with just a small sort of point. One thing that I find very interesting when it comes to GT racing, especially, is when it comes to sort of the pro classes. So in GT World Challenge, if it's pro, or if it's in American Le Mans, if it's the GTD Pro classes, most of the drivers are at a level where one can jump in and one can jump out, and there isn't really much a driver can extract more from the car than another driver. They sort of have to drive within the parameters of how good that car is on any given day.
They also cancel each other out. Their speeds, like they're all not like ranked fairly evenly.
Yes, but then when you get into the categories such as Pro-Am and Silver, I think this is where, like, realistically, you can see a lot more of a more tactical side to setting up your lineup, setting up your stints, being sort of crafty with putting drivers in at certain times during yellows to get their driver time in. So I think, as much as you would say the spectacle of Pro far exceeds AM and Silver, when you look at the actual strategies that take place in AM and Silver, it usually can be more interesting because there is more scope for, being sneaky, for actually being smart in really, terms of those.
Yeah. And also when they
driver strategies,
when they choose to put the M drivers in is super important. Do you get a bit of luck with safety cars and driver times and all those kind of things as well? So
especially this 12-hour, how long it is, like even weather and track temperature and even just like the light at the start of a race, or the lack of light. So many factors.
There's so many more variables purely based on the discrepancy between your Pro and your M drivers and when you choose to put them into the car.
100%.
Really interesting. It's a good point. It's somewhat self-explanatory, but I think it is good to be raised. We've got 8 Pro cars, 8 Pro M cars in this particular category. A little bit more of a spread. So we've got 2 Porsches, we've got 3 Mercedes, and we've got 3 Audis. And I think in some, like the point you were making before about the intrigue surrounding Pro-Am, this is the category, or this is the class that GT racing is made for. I mean, having all pro lineups is fantastic. You get, over the course of a super long race, there's obvious intrigue in a completely pro lineup. But like you said, I think in Pro-Am, when you've got, pros and AMs, you've got people funding these cars, people going racing purely for the enjoyment of or the love of the category. It's really good to see. So we've got teams like Earl Bamber Motorsport coming down. We've got Scott Taylor Motorsport back at the 12-hour. We've got 888 running a Pro-Am team with Richie Stanaway back in the car, which is great to see. We've got Tony Bates changing from Audi to Mercedes, running the Makita car. Next weekend, we've got the ever-present Mark Sini Hallmark car. We've got a Melbourne Performance Centre car that's going to be run for Fraser Ross and Liam Talbot, which has to be considered one of the favourites for the class, considering their consistency last year. We've got a Schumacher car with James Golding, with Frederick Vervish as the pros, which is, I think, has to, in my opinion, the favourite for that particular class. So there is a lot of talent in this particular class. Where would you like to begin, Joe?
I think for me, the most interesting is the the Boost Triple Eight car, to be honest. I think that's a very underrated, or I don't know if it's underrated, but a very strong lineup with
They confirmed the M in that car. Oh, it's Prince Jeffrey. That's right.
yeah, Prince Jeffrey is the M, and then you've got Whincup and Stanaway, which I think is a really good pro lineup, especially with the history that Whincup has in the car at the track. I mean, a lot of people forget Stanaway cut his teeth in GT racing before anything else. Like that's where he really made his name. So I'm very excited to see him jump back into a GT car. I feel like
Do you find it interesting that, number one, that Stanaway is racing for, not that Stanaway is racing for Red Bull, but that Boost is sponsoring a Triple Eight car, even after all the things Peter Adderton has said to and about Red Bull and about Roland Dane. So I think there's intrigue there.
Not because he was always going to buy his car from Triple Eight no matter what, if he got the bid. So that was always part of the case. He would buy a car from Triple Eight. They made a deal. I feel like,
but then he's running a team. He's sponsoring a team that
I think what's more interesting is that at the same time as Boost is putting a lot of money behind Stanaway, which I think is fantastic, Red Bull have sort of like swooped in and sort of given him his career pseudo life support, because I think that Red Bull see something in him and might be consolidating for the fact that they don't know how long Giz has got left, maybe. So I think it's an interesting move, to all of a sudden he's gone from being sort of an outsider in Australian motorsport to being, some would say, what appears to be, could be next in line to one of the most coveted seats in Australian motorsport. And then this added onto it is just another sort of backing behind it, saying, here, we'll put you in one of our cars. And
I think it's really interesting because all of a sudden he's gone from kind of to resurrect his career. He'd raced Bathurst last year. There was talk that maybe he would run wildcards this year. I don't know how realistic that is, but he's in the best team now. And with that team, he's got 18 hours, essentially, because he's got a 12-hour race and a Bathurst race, which takes, roughly 6 hours. He's got 18 hours with the team in a racing capacity or a co-driver capacity, just working with Triple Eight Racing to really, what better interview is there for him to show his credentials as a racer, to show his credentials as a team player, and to really embed himself in the ethos of the team. And realistically, the fact that he gets to run Bathurst, albeit in a different car, with Triple Eight now, and get familiar with the processes and procedures that team goes through, is most definitely going to help him in the in the comfortability factors moving into the great race, later on in the year, which is for him, from being, falling out of love with the sport to kind of wanting to have that resurgence after a couple of years, that career resurrection. He's definitely been given a bone, and he needs to do the best he can to make it to make the most of this opportunity. And it looks like a really strong lineup. My only fear is we've seen Prince Jeffrey put a few cards in the wall over the last 2 years with some pretty ordinary mistakes, and those things are to be expected, obviously, out of an EM driver. I think the only thing that could potentially derail the team here is that even amongst the EMs, he's probably the least experienced one in this particular class. So it'll be very interesting to see when
looking down the road, like you asked me which ones do I consider favorites. Every lineup has got enough pro quality in it to make it very interesting. Like you look at the Schumacher Motorsport Futures one, which is another one I want to point out, because teaming up with Premier Racing, I would have really loved to ask you a few questions about that today if it had gone right, about how that relationship is working. But they've got Jimmy Golding in the car.
and how it came about.
Yeah, they've got Jimmy Golding in the car. They've got Frederick Vervish in the car. They've got Brad Schumacher in the car. So quite a experienced lineup. Then you've got the Melbourne Performance Audi that has got probably I would say the best AM racer in Australia in
Yasser.
Yasser Sahin in the car.
And
So that's gonna
let me just confirm who he's racing with, because that is a strong.
came out today.
It's Yasser Shahin, Ricardo Feller, and Christopher Mies.
Come on,
You know,
that's
the two pros in that car. Realistically,
I'm actually going to say something.
Feller
I
and
reckon
Mies, in my opinion, faster drivers than any of the three that are in the pro lineup.
that I'm gonna actually make a smoky right now. If
Dark
any
horse for the
car was
overall.
if any car was going to win the overall that wasn't a pro car, I want to put my money on that car.
Yeah.
Because I have no real no real objection to the fact that even Shahin could be somewhat close enough to the pace to keep that car more than competitive in his stints. And then with the other two, Mies has been here like probably more than any Audi racer on any factory Audi racer probably in history.
Yep.
Been to the mountain.
Yeah.
And Fella is an absolute animal behind the wheel of an Audi.
Yeah.
Like that's a very impressive pro-am lineup. If I have to go like
out of all of the Audi drivers coming down, that team has the strongest pair of Audi drivers.
I mean, I would say that car and then the Liam Talbot Fraser Ross car.
But I'm interested to see who is going to be
slots into that.
Pardon?
Who slots into that one?
Yeah, I need to see who the third car.
Actually, but that's a silver car though. That's the other thing. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's a silver car. They've got one pro car, one pro M car, and one silver car. Because Fraser Ross and Talbot would both be classified as AMs.
Okay. But yeah, that's a great smoky joke. The
Thank you.
Sport smoky for the overall. If there was a car coming out of pro,
you know what? I'm gonna put $10 on it.
You know what? Even for a podium, Joe.
I'm gonna put $10 on it. I'm gonna put $10 on it. I reckon.
Let's get Harry to put that on one of our instas. Let's smoky for the podium, overall podium.
Done.
I'm a fan. Strong. We've also got to consider
who's in the Scott Taylor Motorsport car for Lounsey. That's another interesting one.
That's one that, anytime you've got Craig Lowndes at Bathurst, I think there's a strong chance. Who's the third? Who are the other drivers in that car though?
Give me a second. Keep talking. I'll find it.
Because realistically, let's say that, I think the maximum driving time is 6 hours. So you would assume that Craig Lowndes is going to be doing at least 6 hours in that car as the pro driver. So the strength in that team relates to who are the other guys that are driving. Scott Taylor has, been around the mountain for long enough if he's going to be the AM in the team, but I'll be interested to see who the third driver in that car is. They've run it last year in a Porsche Cup car.
Here you go. So you've got Craig Lowndes, Alex Davison, and Jeff Emery.
Well, that's a pretty strong lineup.
Scott Taylor, Craig Lowndes.
I wouldn't say that it has the ability to fight for an overall like the other car that we're talking about. That's a pretty strong lineup for a podium in Pro-Am. And I think that car will not show any outright pace throughout the weekend. But if you want a car that will just trug along for 11 hours and then be somewhere thereabouts by the end of the race, that looks like one of the lineups.
The thing is though that car is that the Mercedes seems to be the car to be in at the moment. Last year was a very strong season for it in all forms of GT racing, and then today the first of lapse in anger of GT3 racing, like on your pro calendar, was at Daytona today, and it's a double top four lockout in those AMGs. So, I mean, it's definitely the car to be in, and it's such a long race. You just got to stay on the lead lap and be around the bouts with an hour or two to go. So, the ball's in their court, but I think they've definitely got the machinery underneath them to if they can. Like we said before, if they can position those AM driving stints intelligently, and then you've got Lowndes and Alex Davison behind the wheel when push comes to shove. I definitely think that could be an interesting lineup as well. And we could say this about every car, to be honest. But with Lowndesy behind the wheel, you can't bet against the man. That's the thing.
Well, we're going to assume that he's going to get quite a lot of the drive time.
I would definitely assume that.
If they stay out of trouble, I think it's going to be there or thereabouts. The other interesting team that's joining Bathurst is the EBM, who are running 2 cars. Now, one of those cars, I assume, is going to be a Grove entry. So that's an experienced team. You know, the Groves have, and I think it's the Groves and Anton De Pasquale. So 2.
Wasn't that at the Dubai last week?
Yeah,
are they running it again?
Well, they ran last week as Grove EBM. So okay. It would be fair to assume, and they ran like that at the Spa 24-hour last year as well. So it'd be fair to assume that one of the EBM entries, and for anyone who doesn't know, it's Earl Bamber Motorsport. They are a Porsche GT3 team. I think it's fair to assume that one of those entries is going to be a Grove car, with both the Groves and probably Anton De Pasquale in the lineup. That would be a pretty strong team for a Pro-Am placing on the podium. You know, they've been there, done that. They've represented Australia at the International Motorsport Games. They won a race with Matt Campbell at such an event. You know, they've raced at the Spa 24. They've raced at the Bathurst 12-hour and got podiums there, you know, many times before. I think they're a very well-oiled machine in the Bathurst 12-hour department. And it'll be interesting to see who's in the second car, whether it's going to be, you know, the drivers from the Asian GT World Challenge lineup, you know, the likes of Adrian Delina, Adrian De Silva, maybe even Earl Bamber himself. So it'll be interesting to see when that team is announced, both of those cars, but, you know, it'll be safe to assume that there's going to be some pedigree of pros and AM drivers making up that team.
What do you think of the Volante Rosso Motorsport, the Tony Bates car, with Tony Bates,
I think it's the best looking
Jordan Love
on the grid,
and what's his name, Dave Reynolds?
The interest, we'll start with Dave Reynolds, uber experienced at Bathurst, so he's going to be a steady hand. I think Tony Bates, you know, you'll lose a little bit of pace, obviously, because he's a DM driver, but if he can keep it out of the wall, and obviously you've got Jordan Love, who is super impressive as a GT3 driver, super impressive, you know, in the Porsche career before that. You know, he's going to be, I think, the silver bullet for that lineup, particularly with his last 2 years of experience racing that car, you know, week in and week out in Europe. So I think it's a pretty strong lineup, to be honest with you. If it was me, I would be starting the race with David Reynolds in the car at night, just with his experience. Oh, you know, you might even start it with Love because he's experienced driving that car at night. Like every one of these Pro-Am lineups, with the exception of perhaps Shaheen, who I think could jump into the car in any condition and be strong, I think all the other lineups that are in this category, it's going to be about when they put the Pro-Am or the AM driver into the car. You know, what is the situation? Do you get lucky with him killing some of his driving time under safety car? Do you know
what the time is
before the safety car? But, you know, after, you know, do you get through most of his stint, then you get a safety car to rebunch the pack if he's lost time? All of those little nuances are going to play a huge role in who wins the Pro-Am race. You were asking a question, Joe?
I'm having a quick look up at something. So if you want to keep chatting, I just want to know. I want to confirm how long the Pro-Am stint, the AM stint time is, the minimum stint time.
I think it's 3 hours.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was, to be honest. But
3 hours. It might be 4 hours. It could actually be 4 hours.
I don't think it's 4 hours.
No, because it needs to be a significant amount. Let's move into silver, because that's another. We've got 5 silvers, 6 silvers actually. We've got.
It's going to be I think it's going to be a great category.
Yeah,
because when you look at it, I look at like straight away wall racing Lamborghini,
Yeah.
very very experienced lineup. David
So that's
Wall,
David Wall, Grant Denyer.
Grant Denyer, and he escapes me right now. Oh, Tony D'Alberto.
Yeah.
Very experienced around
But
Bathurst,
two
very
AMs.
experienced.
You've got two AMs. Like if you were talking about Shaheen as an AM driver, David Wall as a in a silver class, is going to be quite a hot prospect, I think.
Then you have like when I look at it, you have the Melbourne Performance Centre. So we definitely know one of them is going to be Talbot
And Ross,
and Fraser Ross with someone else. I mean,
will
whether
they
they
need another? Will they get a pro or will they get an AM?
no, they get it. You get an M or a silver.
Okay. Well, because okay. Well,
Can't have
regardless,
any pro in silver. You can't have any pros. It's just silvers or M's.
yeah. Okay.
But like when you look at those two, that is such a experienced competitive group. And I think last year we saw like a step up from Liam Talbot in I think just the amount of work he's putting into his GT craft. And then like last year when we ended on the streets of Adelaide, he was an absolute demon behind the wheels of that car. He really was showing a lot of he was showing a pace that a lot of the other EMs that are going to be in this race and in these groups couldn't match. So I think if that car can stay healthy, which is the big question for everyone, like what Marcel was saying last week, that is going to be a very, very, very rapid car to look out for.
You look at these lineups, man, and you could throw a blanket over a lot of them. Like they cancel it. Like you look at the Melbourne Performance Centre, Hallmark car with Mark Sini, Fiore, and Holdsworth. That's a well-oiled machine. They've raced at Bathurst, a handful of times together. They know what they're doing. It's a fairly, put together lineup. They're going to be strong. If you look at the Conduras,
Super Barns.
pardon?
With
If you look at the
super
Conduras, got James and Theo. Obviously, there's a little bit more. I think there's a little bit more
M in that group
equity involved in having two M drivers. But if they're able to keep it out of the wall, the two more experienced drivers, Dave Russell. I mean, Dave Russell in the Bathurst 1000 for the last 3-4 years has been one of the top 5 release drivers. Super fast, super consistent. And Jonathan Webb, it's going to be interesting to see how he goes, considering his hiatus from motorsport and
Bathurst
racing.
12-hour champion, though.
He is a Bathurst 12-hour champion. He's a Bathurst 1-hour champion as well. Bathurst 1000 champion as well. So it'll be interesting to see how those two very strong drivers, team up with the Conduras boys. And what was the other car that we needed to talk about? Oh, the Valmont car. We've got the Valmont boys. Now, last year, obviously there was the issue that befell them, but we saw the quality of Devash and Pariachi, putting the car in the top 10 as a silver car. So that's, it's pretty impressive. They've got the skills of Aaron Cameron joining the team. He's hot property in everything he seems to be touching in Australia, whether it's a TCR or a S5000 car. I think, there's going to be a little bit of a coming out party for him, because everything that he seems to be driving, he's driving really well. I think the varied experience of driving both the TCR, which is, can push as hard as you want, it seems to be stable, but then, being also super impressive in the S5000, which is the opposite of that. It's all rear end power, controlling the car, etc. And we've obviously seen how strong he is at Bathurst in the last 3 events that TCR have had there. So I think that's, a pretty strong lineup as well. And realistically,
one thing I think
how those men or how those AMs, both Serge and Marcel grow from last year's event. You know, we
I
saw
think
definite quality there, but realistically, you know, the I think the crux for the Silver Cup cars teams, when you've got, you know, more AMs, less depth of talent in those cars, is can you keep it out of the wall long enough to give yourself a shot at the podium in the last, you know, 90 minutes of the race?
I think that is I was going to make this point. Going through these, you know, these groups, I think the main difference between pro to pro am and then pro am to silver, and then even sort of silver to invitational, is the the need for risk every step down. I think gets accentuated a little bit more. Like when you're in a pro lineup, you do need to risk a bit more because it is imperative you stay on that lead lap. When
everybody's risking it. Everybody's putting 100% in. So if you're going at 95, you're falling behind, and you might never.
That's right. But I feel like for like when you go into pro am and you go into the silver levels, surviving, staying on that lead lap, not risking, and just being there at the end is so imperative, because you will get laps back, you will get cautions that bring you back to the pack.
Can I throw an idea out there?
Yeah.
Pro is about balls to the wall, but staying in control for 12 hours. No let up. It's a 12-hour sprint race. Pro Am is a strategy race. Balls to the wall most of the way. When do you get the AM driver in the most, you know, when do you put the M driver in so that it limits the damage as much as possible? And there's obviously an element of luck involved in that as well. So it's kind of a strategy race from that perspective. And then when we get to the Silver Cup, it's a survival race. How long can you keep the car out of the garage with the talent or the people that are driving, to give those more experienced drivers the chance at the end to either maintain a position or to push to get you in a position to stand on that podium at the end of the race. Is that a nice
100%.
synopsis?
I think so. I think you've hit the nail on the head there.
I think I have too. I'm pretty impressed with that, if I do say so myself. Another thing, you know, we've kind of broken down all the categories. We've got a few invitationals. I mean, the Mark cars are back. One of them's the old Mazda. The other one is the, you know, the Mark II V8. Only one of them's back this year. There's a Daytona sports car. I'm assuming that's the older, you know, white Corvette looking thing that used to run around. You know, I mean,
a Viper, isn't it? Isn't it a Viper?
Yeah, maybe. And we've got one KTM GT that could, like, I think it would be interesting to see if the KTM stays out of the wall. That seems to be the issue with KTMs every time they come down to Bathurst, you know, where they would finish up in the overall. Because we've seen them in, you know, the Nordschleife, we've seen them in Preventic, and they've, you know, they're there or thereabouts. But it'd be interesting to see how that team performs. Apart from that, I don't know, invitationals to me aren't why you go watch the Bathurst 12-hour. And I think we've broken down the three key categories pretty well tonight, Joe. One thing to talk about with the upcoming 12-hour is the return to the February time slot. You know, there's obviously less chance of rain.
A downpour.
You know, maybe not so much this year with the amount of water we've had throughout our summer, but there is less chance of rain. Slightly more or a slightly longer, slightly earlier sunrise, which is, I guess, beneficial for the drivers. But I like the return. You know, it's always good, I think, having, you know, the Dubai 24-hour to me is like, okay, racing's back. And then you anticipate, as we are now, for, you know, the 24 hours of Daytona and what that spectacle is and what it brings. And then it's always good to go straight from that into the Australian, you know, it's a great way to start any kind of racing in Australia. I think it's great to have it as the first event for, you know, GT racing, you know, purely GT racing around the world. It's great to see the drivers come down Do you have any thoughts, any, I don't know, anything you'd like to say about the return to its traditional time slot?
I think I was talking about this last week with someone else. I think realistically, this is sort of a building year again for all the momentum that the event had amassed over the last couple of years. I think COVID
Before
really
COVID,
hit it.
it was really starting to hit its international straps.
Yeah, and then I think COVID really, hit it for six. But I look at this year sort of as we're gonna have the eyes of the GT community on us again at the start of the year, sort of like the first pure GT race of the year, which it is, and I feel like it's imperative that there is a good show so that the excitement can build for next year, like with teams like Group M, WRT, Craft Bamboo coming from Asia, getting even like Volante getting that Hong Kong based team coming out to race for them as well in Pro Am.
Yeah,
Like all these
Kevin Say and who's the other one?
I'm not sure,
Is
but
it what's his name? Oh, Young,
Daryl O'Young.
Daryl Young, could be
Could
Daryl.
be, I'm not sure. But regardless, I think all these little pieces are sort of just little sort of building blocks to sort of build it back up. And it's not starting from the level of where it was, say, 8 years ago, but it needs to remind people of what event it is. And I think like a lot of GT championships are sort of having this problem as well. Not having a problem, but like for this intercontinental challenge, the need for sort of reminding people about sort of the special aspects of it are imperative. And I think that's what this race is really gonna need to showcase. And looking at the lineups and looking at like going through what teams are here, what drivers are here, what sponsors are putting money into it and want to be involved. Like all these little things show that, yeah, it's not as strong as it has been, I don't know, 4 years ago when it was sort of at its prime, but it's definitely a strong enough lineup and event and teams involved that it could be now the building blocks again to sort of get it back up to where we want it to be, not where it needs to be.
We've gone from 20 cars last year to 26 cars this year. We've got 22 GT3 cars, which is definitely not the weakest GT3 lineup I've seen. So we've got the invitation class. And one thing that we do have a really strong presence in Australia is the Porsche Carrera Cup. Now we've seen other GT categories like Creventic, like the VLN, run a Porsche Cup class within their GT endurance racing really successfully. Is there an argument to open up the new Cup class in this event just to build, and it's a more competitive field than some of the invitationals. We've got like one GT4 car, which is not so useful if you're trying to run it as a class. Do you know what I mean? So rather than having,
I think all the drivers from that category I think all the drivers from that category who would want to be in this race are in this race in different teams. That's like, I don't think we have teams in that category who want to run their cup car for 12 hours.
What if Porsche helped out with it?
No, my thing is, I don't think you need it there. Like, it's no point. I don't think it's a point putting it there for like a year as a stopgap. I'd rather have 24.
I don't mean to have it as a stopgap. I mean to push for it to be a class moving forward. I mean, we have.
No, I don't think so.
Strong presence. Like this is the other thing, right? You've got David Wall running in a 4-car team. Very easily, he could pull out of that team and run a cup car as well. You've got David Russell.
But it's all money.
You've got Sam Shaheen, who has run at, he's not running this year, but has run at, yes, it's money. But if number one, Porsche Carrera Cup runs at a lot of supercar events, so it would be easy for supercars perhaps to subsidize or to provide some initiatives to get these or to get some of these fields into the event. You've got a lot of drivers that are already running at the event. And I think if they were to run a cup car as opposed to, being a team of the GT3, I think you could still field the GT3 with, another driver from either a pro or an AM class that isn't there.
What I think, what I think realistically is what's going to happen in the next coming years. So we've seen sort of COVID has affected the category or motorsport in general to a sort of a very base level all around the world. But what we're seeing as well is a lot of big teams changing their allegiances in preparation for the LMH sort of season that's coming in the future. So we've seen sort of Lamborghini, like one of the biggest Lamborghini teams around the world, FFF Racing, just completely fold this week. We've got teams like Iron Lynx lining up with Lamborghini. We've got Ford bringing out a brand new GT3 car in the coming year. We've got Corvette bringing out a brand new GT3 car in the coming year. We have Ford Racing saying we want to race this car at the Bathurst 12-hour. We want to race this car at the Le Mans 24-hour. So I highly
the year of shift.
It is a transitional year, but I would not be surprised
that have bought new cars because there's been a big change in the generation of a lot of cars. Ferrari's got a new car, Porsche a new car, Lamborghini's got a new car. You got even to race at this event. So
everything's happened all at once.
Pardon?
So everything sort of happened all at once. So I wouldn't be looking at this year's grid and going, oh, do we need to invent new ways to spice it up? It's no, let's just run a good event this year, first and foremost, run a good event. And we will have teams who will want to come and, add to this race in the coming years. We have manufacturers who have stated they want to come to this race in coming years. I'm sure that if Corvette bring out a GT car, which they are, if Ford bring out a GT car, which they are, you will have teams like Tickford who have expressed interest in running a Ford GT3 car, or maybe Erebus run a Corvette GT3 car. There is no way you could not convince me that those cars will not be on the grid at Bathurst at some time in the next
particularly if the history of Ford and GM at the event.
That's right. So I wouldn't delve into it as much as the alarm bells as much as you might be expressing there.
That's a very strong point. I have to agree with that. I think the greatest part is, as an Australian, this race showcases our drivers, our tracks, our organisation, for use of a better phrase, to the world. It's always great.
I'll tell you what else it showcases. It showcases how well we actually can show the race, because it's only when you watch other international racing where you realize how good the broadcast is, how good the camera angles are, how good the pit commentary is, how good the actual timing displays are for the race. And that's something that we have to give credit to Supercars for, because they've taken the production value of this race to another level.
I think also it has to be said that the supercar idiosyncrasies of how the race is managed keeps it very, very engaging.
Australian.
I mean, it's very Australian, very somewhat American as well, in that, in Europe, we see, these full course cautions. It might be a little bit harder at Bathurst to do that, but I think it could be done with the automated system. And yet, the Australian, or the nature of Bathurst and the condensing of the grids with the safety cars keeps the race very much like the Bathurst 1000, engaging throughout. I mean, last year, because there were less cars, and maybe to an extent it'll be similar this year, just because there are less cars and there's more room on track. Maybe not, to be honest with you, there's still 22 of them. But, hopefully, with the safety cars, it will keep the race engaging for long periods. I mean, we've seen, races in the past with, the Earl Bamber, Team Kiwi Porsche and the Aston Martin who are on varying strategies. 5 years ago, kind of converging at the end. We've seen, the Porsche, fall out of favour the year after with Matt Campbell again. So Australia and Bathurst have the knack of keeping the field together. And I think that works very well for both of their biggest events. And hopefully we get another one like that this year.
Are you coming?
I won't be. Why did you do it live on air?
Because you're a pussy.
Yeah. You know what? I think we'll leave it there.
Peer pressure.
Haven't been down to the Bathurst 12-hour and you've got a free weekend, or you're looking for something to do the weekend after next, the weather should be fine. Even if it isn't, it's a great event, wet or dry, preferably dry though. Get yourself up to Mount Panorama. If you're in Sydney, it's not too far away. It's a great day. You don't have the claustrophobic nature of Bathurst on a Bathurst 1000 weekend. It's really great to take your family up, pitch a tent, pitch a gazebo, take a few cold ones up, take a few fishing chairs up, enjoy the day. I mean, who doesn't want to see GT3 cars running around the track, in 2-minute laps? So get up there, support the event, support Australian racing. It's going to be an absolute cracker. We've got a great mix of Australian and international drivers going up there, which will spice it up. We've got a really engaging Pro-Am class. We've got an uber interesting Silver Cup class. And if you've watched or listened to this podcast, keep in mind the little synopsis that we've made. I mean, GT3 Pro, balls to the wall, 24 for 12 hours. Pro-Am, it's about, getting the AM in at the right time to minimize the discrepancy between their pace and the pro. And obviously Silver Cup, it's about getting the drivers to minimize the mistakes they make, keep the car out of the wall, more importantly, keep the car out of the garage. And if you're following those storylines throughout, then it's going to be super engaging for you. And if you're not, and you're watching it on TV or watching it at the event, you're just going to love watching cars go around track fast. I think that is the beauty of motorsport. At the very least, we love seeing things go fast. We'll leave it there, Joe?
Yeah, I thought you were going to end it with something profound, and then you stopped.
All right. So please like, subscribe, share the pod, keep spreading the word. We appreciate you jumping on and listening to us every single week. We've got more good content coming out next week when we interview the team from the Melbourne Performance Centre and the 3 cars that they're entering in the Bathurst 12-hour. And after that, we will have the review of the Bathurst 12-hour, which takes place 2 weekends from now. So thank you so much. Have a great
February
time.
5th.
Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.